Stats show us that more than 11 million of South Africa's credit-active consumers are described as over-indebted. This evening on Moneyline, we take a look at what drives consumers to borrow. And joining me for this discussion is Enca, who is head of Alexandra Forbes Research. And thanks so much for your time this evening. Very interesting, when we just talk about debt in South Africa, we're always told we're terrible savers and we're over-indebted and we borrow too much. And there's almost a negative,
extremely negative.
It's a very negative tone to it. But when we compare ourselves globally, what is the picture?
Well, I think that's the thing that got all the attention, because there was a World Bank study, Global Findex, that came out and said 86% of South Africans are borrowing money, and that ranks South Africa right at the bottom in terms of who borrows the most and who borrows the least. And yet, I think the problem with that number is that it really masks what was going on in South Africa. So if you really went down into the detail, what you realized is that actually 71% of that borrowing was happening within families and friends. So there's a sort of social capital dynamic that happens in South Africa. Now, is this good? Is this bad? The point is that it's different. And the problem that we really experience in South Africa is that we have probably one of the most successful financial industries in the developing world. In fact, the World Economic Forum ranked South Africa number 3rd in terms of financial markets in 2013. So we have this first world skill set that resides in our financial services industry. But it's not solving a developing economy problem. It's not solving a problem whereby 50% of the savings is actually happening in the informal sector, not in the formal sector.
Yeah, so that's your Stokvels, that sort of...
So the problem with solving the debt problem is that we're trying to solve it with a first world model, when in fact you've got a pretty functional developing economy, a social capital economy, I'll call it. And are we really utilizing those kinds of avenues to solve the problem, to have the conversation? And one way, I was talking to a really fascinating group of young economists. In fact, that's what they're called, Young Economists for Africa.
Yes.
And I don't know if you
know them very well.
Them,
yes.
But I love the way they're thinking. So they'll tell you things like, they'll be talking about things like black tax, which is sort of a particular phenomenon here where a young individual gets a job, finally gets through university, gets that plum job, and what happens to that first paycheck? It goes back to support the family that has funded that education. Now, is that a bad model? No, not necessarily. But what it does suggest is that when it comes to things like planning and savings, you can't just do it with that individual. You have to talk to the whole family.
The whole family. So the way that our financial products and our savings products are designed is that they're targeted at an individual rather than a family unit in the way that we look at family units in South Africa.
Well, it's interesting because when I was talking to the Young Economists for Africa, the Rethink Africa people, they said, oh, but we need to have better financial products. And I said, no, you don't need better financial products. You need a better process for how I engage with somebody around their finances. So it's the process problem that we're not really meeting. It's that, how do I actually offer advice? Now, first of all, we have a problem in advice as an offer to people that don't have money, right? Yes. and so that's a starting point. So it's no wonder that you have a financial services industry that has put all of its resources into retirement funding, tremendous intellectual capital there. But nobody's looking at the full journey. So they wonder why our preservation rates are so extraordinarily low. Well, guess what? Because most people aren't even worried about retirement. They're not even expecting to live that long. So you've got to go back and say, how do we use that tremendous intellect to solve problems that actually relate to people's journey, not just that end goal? And that's where that whole debt crisis has to be busted. I mean, just look at the way the structure of the industry works. Debt is handled over here by the debt consulting industry, and credit or how you leverage your financial assets is over here in the financial services industry. They're regulated by totally different entities. there's nothing that ties those two problems together and says it's not one or the other. It's a continuum that needs to be resolved. These two entities need to speak to each other.
We'll leave it there. Thank you so much for your time today. And Cabot Aleshauser is head of Alexandra Forbes Research.